All right. I am so excited that you're here. As Andy shared, if you have ever desired to say, how do I learn to trust God more? How do I learn to rely on his promises, to have greater confidence that he will take care of me in every aspect of my life? If you've ever said, I read the passages in the Bible, things like when it talks about Abraham, the father of our faith, and it says Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him. It was accounted to his record as righteousness because he believed God. Well, that's great and that's wonderful, and we all want to grow in our faith. And if that's something you've ever desired, I am so glad you're here, because in this series that we're in called The Spiritual Life, as we're taking a look at our spiritual lives, how do we know where we are spiritually? What we've been unpacking over these weeks is that there's 5 main areas, 5 main things that you can look at and say, it gives you an idea of how you're doing spiritually. And here they are: attend, serve, connect, give, share. Attend, serve, connect, give, share. And by the way, didn't Pastor Andy do a great job last week talking about how we connect in groups? It's a great way that we grow. And I encourage you, if you haven't signed up for a connect group, do that today before you leave. It's a great way to grow spiritually. But earlier in this series, when we talked about serving, I made a statement. I said the number one way that you can grow spiritually is to serve. I believe that. I believe that with my whole heart, because when we serve, we're the most like Jesus. And when we serve, we use our talents. We invest our time to help others. It can be serving within the context of the church, serving your family, serving within your neighborhood or your neighbors, those in your life that you just need to reach out to and share the love of Jesus. A great example, just a couple weeks ago, there's a couple in the church, John and Jenny Board, and they came, they served this church. Not because they wanted me to say this, they're probably going to be mad that I do, but I can apologize later. They came and just invested their time, almost two full evenings that they came and recarpeted the stairs that go down to our children's ministry, and they did a fantastic job. And when you serve like that, you grow spiritually the most when you serve. And if that's true, then this is also true. When you give, it is the number one way that you can learn to trust God, because giving increases your trust in God. Giving increases your trust in God. And when I'm talking about giving this morning, I'm talking about giving of your financial resources. When you give, it increases your trust in God, unlike anything else you can do. People say, I trust God with my eternity. Great. Do you trust him with the dollars that he's placed in your hand? In some ways, it's easier to trust God for eternity. It's a lot harder to trust God with those things that we hold, that we possess. It's one of the reasons that Jesus talks about finances and possessions more than he talks about prayer and faith combined. He talks about finances, because when we give, it increases our trust in God. Here's how Paul, taking that idea, writes to his spiritual son Timothy in 1 Timothy. He says, teach those who are rich in this world not to be proud and not to trust in their money, which is unreliable. Their trust should be in God. Giving increases your trust in God. God, who richly gives us all that we need for our enjoyment. Tell them to use their money to do good, to give. They should be rich in good works, be generous to those in need, always being ready to share with others. You see a theme here? Giving increases our trust in God. By doing this, they will be storing up their treasure as a good foundation for the future, so that they may experience true life. We need to learn, how do I trust God? How do I give in a way that helps me to grow in my trust of who God is, what he's placed in my hand? And the number one way to do that is by giving. Now, I know when we read that passage, it says, tell those who are rich in this world. And a lot of us say, well, that's not me. Here's what I know. If you work from age 25 to 65 and you make $25,000 a year, for some of you that sounds like, man, if I made that much a year, I would be set. And some of you go, if I made that much a year, I would be broke. I'm telling you, if you simply make $25,000 a year from 25 to 65, you will have earned $1 million. You and I manage a fortune. What do you do with the resources that God has placed with you? Giving increases your trust because giving is always, always, always an act of trust. Giving is always an act of trust, whether you're giving to God or whether you're giving to someone else. If you've ever bought stock, in essence, what you're doing is you're giving a company your money. And it's an act of trust. You're trusting that that company will be profitable. If you ever give money to a friend, you're trusting that they'll use that money wisely. If you've ever given money to a child, you're trusting that they'll be responsible with their resources. But here's what I've learned, and this is the truth. The closer you are to what you give, the harder it is to let go. You give money to a company, you give money to an organization, you buy stock, you give to a great organization like Focus on the Family or the Salvation Army. You give to them. And what you're not that close to those organizations. And so you may not agree with everything that they do, but what do you say to yourself? I know that they're doing a good work. So you let it go and you trust. But the closer you are to what you give to a friend who's in financial stress. You give to that child. What do mom and dads do? They give money to a kid and they say, this is your birthday money. And the kid goes, I want to go to the store and buy bubble gum. No, you can't do that. You can't buy bubble gum. Have you really given that child the money? You give money to a friend who's in financial distress and you don't like the way that they are spending what you've given them, and it creates tension because the closer you are to what you give, the harder it is to let go. It's so difficult, but we need to realize that when we give, it is learning to trust. So here's something you need to remember. The more you seek to control it, what you give, the more you seek to control it, the less you are actually giving it. The more you seek to control it, the less you're actually giving it. And Jesus knew this. Jesus knows our hearts. He knows that the closer we are to something, the harder it is to really let it go. And so what does he tell his disciples? He says, freely you have received, freely give. Don't hold on to it. Don't seek to control it. Freely give it. And it's a matter of trust. Trust that that which you're giving will be used well. But if it's not, it's no longer yours. Freely give. Jesus is actually picking up on an idea that was found in King David. King David is wanting to build a temple to the Lord. And he begins to solicit funds and donations from the leaders of the nation and then from the people. He knows he's not going to be able to build it, but he wants to resource the kingdom so when his son ascends to the throne after him, he can build this beautiful temple, Solomon's temple, to God. And here's what it says in 1 Chronicles. The people rejoiced at the willing response of their leaders, for they had given freely and wholeheartedly to the Lord. The leader said, we're giving this to God. It's one of the reasons here at our church, everyone on the leadership team gives. They give, and they give regularly and consistently. They gave, and so it says, they gave freely to the Lord. And then it goes on. Then David says this, and this is incredible. He says, who am I and who are my people that we should be able to give as generously as this? Everything comes from you, God. Everything comes from you. We have only given you what comes from your hand. So it is about learning to trust. It's about saying, God, you're my source. You're my provider. You're the one who causes me to increase. And because you cause me to increase, I can trust you with everything. He says, we have only given back to you what's come from you. So here's what we need to learn. We give freely to the Lord because we recognize he has given everything to us. He's given everything to us, so we give freely to him. Now, earlier this year, I did a series called Dollars and Cents. And in that series, I made a statement. I said, give to what touches your heart and changes your heart. Give to what touches your heart and changes your heart. And then I also said, I hope that that is the local church in which you're connected. But if it's not, then maybe you need to find a different local church, but give. It's better to give something than to not give anything. Better to give somewhere than not give anywhere. But this morning, I want to take that idea and I want to look more closely at how do we give to the local church. How do we do that? How do we begin to walk that process out of trusting God? Because giving to the local church is biblical. It is found throughout the New Testament. Because when you give to the local church, three things happen. We're just going to touch on these quick. The first is this: it provides for the staff. It provides for the staff. It provides for those who are earning a living by serving within the context of the local church. Here's what it says in 1 Corinthians. Paul's writing. He says, if we have sown spiritual seed among you, is it too much if we reap a material harvest from you? It's a rhetorical question. We have invested spiritual thing, something that's lasting, something that is eternal in value. Is it so much that we would reap some financial support from that? The second thing is this: when you give to the local church, it provides for those in the church, those who are brothers and sisters in Christ within the context of the family of God in that local church. In the book of Acts, it says this: there was not a needy person among them, for as many as were owners of lands or houses sold them and brought the proceeds of what was sold and laid it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to each as any had need. When you give, it allows a local church to help those in the church that are in need. Now, you go to some churches and you say, well, we just read it said there's none in need. But in this church, there are people in need. I will say this: if there's a church that there are needs that aren't being met, it's probably because some people aren't giving. It says they sold their houses. They gave everything so that no one was in need. But when you give to a local church, it allows those in the church to be helped. And this church is so generous, and in the time I've been here, the things that we've been able to do to help those in the church is amazing because of your generosity and your giving. We've helped people with medical bills. We've helped people with car repairs. We've helped people with counseling, going through big issues in their marriage and their family. We've helped people with food and rent and utility bills, and on the list goes. I can name ton of things that we've been able to do. And it's because of the generosity. Are there still needs? Yes. But as we give, we're able to meet those needs in a way that helps and supports the body of Christ. And the last thing is this: when you give to the local church, it provides for the poor. It provides for the poor. So here's Paul. He's out ministering, and he's sharing the gospel with these people that aren't Jews. They're Gentiles. And there's this whole do they need to become Jews? How does this work? And there's this conference and there's this council meeting in the city of Jerusalem, and they make some decisions. And now Paul is retelling that. And here's one of the only requirements, not the only one, but one of the main requirements that they said when it came to sharing the gospel with those outside the Jewish faith. This is, they asked us to remember the poor, the very thing I was eager to do. Give to the local church, it supports and helps to those that are in need, those that are struggling outside the body of Christ. And we do that at this church. One way we do that is through our partnership, our strategic partnership with House of Grace, who helps those that are most at risk, these girls that are in these tribal regions in Thailand and also in Ghana, West Africa, that are high at risk to get into the sex trade industry. And it protects them and it gives them a place to go. And they're coming from squalor. I've been in some of those villages. They have nothing. It helps the poor. But beyond that, it helps those that are in need within our community. We've paid rent. We've paid utility bills. We've put food on people's tables. We've put people in hotel rooms who are without a place to lay their head at night. Give them a nice meal and a place to sleep. We've helped people that find work and jobs. We've given financial training because of giving to the local church. See, if you try and do that on your own and you give $100 to somebody in need, you do $100 worth of good. But when we come together and pool our resources through the local church, we can do thousands of dollars of good. Just to the House of Grace alone, we give, I think, about $13,000 a year. That's huge, the impact that we're making that's going to live way beyond you or me. So giving to the local church is biblical. It's biblical. But growing in your trust with God and by giving, it always starts with a step. Giving starts by taking a step. Growing in giving starts by taking a step. It doesn't matter where you are in your walk with the Lord, it starts by taking a step. It's a process. None of us place our faith in Christ and are amazing givers the next day. We grow in that process. Here's how Paul, writing to the Corinthians, says it. He says, just as you excel in everything, you excel in faith, in speech, in knowledge, you excel in having complete earnestness, and in your love for us, see that you also excel in this grace of giving. Excel in the grace of giving. You all know this. This is not something you don't know, that none of us learn how to do something with excellence the first time we do it. There are the rare prodigies out there, the Beethovens and the Mozarts who just can play amazing pieces of music with never having learned anything. But most of us have to grow in anything that we excel at over time. So take something as basic as driving a car. The first time you get behind the wheel, your palms are sweaty, your knuckles are white, you're squeezing that steering wheel so tight, it's leaving imprints. Your back's sweaty, and you're paying attention to everything. And mom or dad, if you've ever taught one of your children how to drive, you know it's as nerve-wracking for you as it is for them. They're all over the place. They're drifting left and right, and they forget to use their blinker, and they don't know to brake, and it's just terrible. But day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, driving becomes second nature. You go from not being good at driving to excelling at driving. It just comes natural. But then, as a driver, you're placed in situations that are you new or unique or something you haven't done very often. You all of a sudden have to parallel park. And what's second nature most of the time becomes nerve-wracking. I just spent 3 days in New York City, and I'm driving around New York City, and driving is second nature to me. In New York City, I'm like, ugh, this isn't quite as enjoyable. You got beeping and honking and hand gestures, and you got everything going on. Maybe you've never pulled a trailer before, and all of a sudden the first time you get in a truck and you're pulling a 15-foot trailer behind you, and what's normal and natural doesn't feel so normal and natural. Who here has ever driven a manual transmission car? Okay, those of you who haven't, you might think driving is second nature. I'm going to put you in a manual transmission car, and you're going to go, there's an extra pedal here. What do I do with that? But here's what I've learned. Even in those situations where you're growing as a driver, things that are not normal and natural, the basic act of driving is still second nature. It makes those other experiences much easier. In the same way, growing in your giving mimics that. You start, you give for the first time. You want to give. It's hard, it's scary, you're not sure if you can afford it. How much should I give? And you're anxious about it, and you're worried, and you're not really consistent with it, and you struggle, but you continue to give. And over time, giving becomes second nature. But then you get a bonus, and you feel that the Lord's telling you, give that whole bonus. Then all of a sudden, you've got this stock, and you feel the Lord saying, sell that stock and give that. And those things make you nervous and anxious, and you go, I don't know, that's different than what I've been doing. But giving is still second nature. And those expansions, growing, taking a step in trusting God is much easier because giving has become part of who you are. So what I want to do this morning is kind of walk you through what some people call the giving ladder, the generosity ladder. It's just a term. It's not in the Bible. It's just ideas in the Scripture that teach you how to take step by step how to grow in giving. So the first step is this: to be a first-time giver, to give for the very first time. The first time you give means just that. You give. You've never given before. And you give. You give an amount. It doesn't matter the amount. You're just giving. It might be $50, might be $500, might be $5. But you've given an amount. That's wonderful. You can't become a generous giver if you never give at all. It's the first step. You give for the first time. You pick an amount and you give it. But that can be anxious. Because again, it's a matter of trust. Or what if that organization, what if the church doesn't use the resources the way I think they should? But you give. Now, that's a great first step. Now, the next step on the ladder is this. When you become an occasional giver. An occasional giver. Now, all of a sudden, you give, but you don't give on a regular, consistent basis. The offering time at church comes, and you open up your wallet, and you grab $20, $50, throw it in the plate, and that's wonderful. And you might not give again for 3 or 4 weeks, 6 weeks, and you get a little bonus. You get an unexpected birthday gift or something, and you give another $30. Listen, that is wonderful. That is moving from being a first-time giver to an occasional giver. And that's a great thing. Here's what you do. If you want to take that step, if you want to take the first step to be a first-time giver, then give for the first time. If you want to take the step to become an occasional giver, give. Just give occasionally. Maybe even write down, hey, I want to try and give $100 every couple months. Just want to give $100 every few months. It doesn't have to be on a timeline. I want to give occasionally. But then pray, God, help me to move from being an occasional giver to the next step, which is a regular giver. This is when you give on a regular, consistent basis. It's not based on your income. It's based on what you can afford in your budget. This is not about saying it's a percentage of my income. This is about saying my budget can handle giving $50 a month. $20 a week, whatever it is, and you plan for that, you budget it, and you say, I'm going to give $20 every week. By the way, this is where online giving is very helpful because you can set it up as a regular recurring donation. You don't have to think, I'm going to give $20 every week. You set it. It's a regular gift. You give it regularly and consistently, and this is a great next step because you've now moved from the first time to the occasional. Now you're giving regularly. Now you're beginning to flex that giving muscle and saying, I'm doing this. I'm growing. I'm trusting God. It's scary, but I know I can afford it. This isn't a huge step of faith, but it is a step of faith. And as you continue to do that, now is when really you begin to stretch yourself. When you move from being a regular giver to being a percentage giver. A percentage giver. That's somebody who gives a determined percentage of their gross income back to the Lord. A determined percentage. Some people call that tithing. It's a biblical idea. It's basically taking 10% of your gross income and giving it back to the Lord. Remember, David said, we're only giving back to you that which you've already given to us. You give the tithe, you're giving it back to God. You're giving 10%. But maybe you say, I'm not going to start with 10%. Fine, start with 6%, but it's a percentage. It's not what you can necessarily afford. It's saying, I am predetermining I'm going to give this percent. Percentage giving, 6%. Grow to 7%. Next year, maybe 8%. 10% is great, but 10% is not the final resting place either. You may grow beyond that. Now, to give you an idea of what this looks like, there was a guy about a year and a half ago. He signed, at the time, the largest contract in NFL history. It has since been surpassed a number of times, but it was amazing to me. He plays for a team that I absolutely hate. I despise them. The Oakland Raiders. I will root against them no matter who they're playing. Unless somehow their winning helps the Denver Broncos. Then I'll root for them. But I can't stand the Oakland Raiders. But when this man signed this contract and he's giving a press conference afterward and they're asking him all kind of questions, he said something and it stood out to me. And it made me want to root for him to do really well and yet the Raiders to lose. So here's what he said.
Your priorities are in life and everything are well known, but it is a huge contract. And you're not really an extravagant guy, but is there one thing that you're going to sort of splurge on that you can let us know?
Chick-fil-A, probably Chick-fil-A. I've been eating clean. We got Lad here. He's been having me eat clean. I'll probably get some Chick-fil-A. But no, first thing I'll do is I'll pay my tithe like I have since I was in college, getting $700 on a scholarship check. That won't change. I'll do that. I'll probably give my wife something nice. Even though she begs me not to. She still gets coupons ever since I've known her, she finds coupons. She gets online trying to find discounts and all those things, and none of that's going to change. The exciting thing for me, money-wise, honestly, is that this money's going to help a lot of people. I'm very thankful to have it, that it's in our hands, because it's going to help people not only in this country but in a lot of countries around the world, and that's what's exciting to me.
Did you hear what he said? He said, I'm going to tithe, but I've always tithed. This is something that's become a regular part of my life. This isn't now I've just signed a $125 million contract, now I'll tithe. He said when I was getting a $700 check as a scholarship athlete, I tithed off of that. It's a percentage. He did it regularly and consistently. And then what did he say? He said, first of all, Chick-fil-A is not clean eating. In case you know. It may be good eating, it's not clean eating. No, he said, I want it to do good. I want it to be used to help people. I don't want it to be about me. I want it to be about other people. And when you begin to set a percentage and you do it regularly and consistently, not only does it grow your trust in who God is, it begins to shift your focus from me to others, from what I need, from what my family needs, to how can I help other people? Now, that leads to a question that a lot of people ask, and it's this: are Christians required to tithe? Are Christians required to tithe? I want to answer that in two ways. The first answer is no. They're not required to tithe. Like if you stop tithing, you lose your salvation. Tithing and being a Christian are inseparable. You're not required to tithe, but it is something that God asks us to do. But really, in asking this question, are Christians required to tithe, you're asking the wrong question. Because what it seems to me that most people ask when they ask that question is, what's the minimum amount I'm supposed to give? I don't hear anyone, I'm not saying this doesn't happen, I don't hear anybody who asks that question says, I'd really like to give like 40%, but if I'm only required to give 10, then obviously I can't give more. And so it's almost as if they're saying, what's the least amount I'm required to give? So really, we're asking the wrong question when we ask, are Christians required to tithe? Here's the question that we should ask: how much more can I give? How much more can I give beyond 10%? See, for me, for my first paycheck when I was 15 years old, and through my entire adult life, through my entire married life, my wife Jamie and I, we have always given a percentage of our income, at least 10%. This year, I'm hoping it'll be close to 12%. Maybe next year, it'll be 13%. I want to continue to grow and excel in the grace of giving. And so if you simply say, what's the minimum amount? Fine, 10%. I will give $13.15. I'm just going to give the minimum amount that I'm required to give. You miss the point of growing in generosity. So do I believe in biblical tithing? I believe in it at a personal level. I believe we ought to tithe. I believe we ought to give back to God through the local church. But are Christians required to tithe? No. Christians ought to give more. We ought to ask the question, how much more can I give? Which leads to the last step on the ladder, which is when you become a sacrificial giver. A sacrificial giver. This is when not only are you expanding your trust in God in such a way that you may sometimes feel like you're standing on the precipice and you're going, this is crazy. It also becomes one of the most exciting things that you can do. Because what you're doing is you are moving from asking the question, how much should I give, to this: how much should I keep? How much should I keep? If everything that I have is God's and everything I have has come from God, then how much of God's should I keep for myself? Becoming a sacrificial giver is scary, it is frightening, but it is one of those things that those that I know that have gotten there, oh my gosh, their faith, their trust in God, their confidence in who God is, it's like they're soaring at 30,000 feet. It's amazing to me. All of a sudden they do things like sell stock and say, I'm giving that to the church. They divest themselves of investments and say, it's not about how much I can generate for myself, it's how much can I give back to God who's blessed me so much. They set up their estates and their wills so that they're leaving something not just to their children and their grandchildren, but they're leaving something to the family of God through the local church. And it is frightening, and it is stretching, and it is freeing all at the same time. And the reason it is because those people that become sacrificial givers. So when you become a sacrificial giver, it moves you from looking at the temporal to shifting your eyes to the eternal. All of a sudden, you're looking beyond the here and the now. Because what those folks have come to realize is this great wisdom from Solomon in the book of Ecclesiastes, who said, we all come to the end of our lives as naked and empty-handed as on the day you were born. We all leave this world with nothing. He says, we can't take our riches with us. We can't take it with us. But if we give it back to God, as we read earlier, then we are preparing for ourselves treasures in the life to come. And that is frightening and freeing all at the same time. Because it allows us to say, my trust is in God and God alone. It's not in dollars. It's not in a bank account. It's not in my portfolio. It's not in my financial advisor. It is in God. Most of us here remember the financial downturn from 2007. And if you had any investments, you went from maybe doing pretty well to going, well, I've got nothing. Because if everything you have is based in your portfolio and you lose that, you don't have anything. But if everything you have is based on your trust in who God is, then you can lose everything and you still have everything you'll ever need. Here's what Paul says in 2 Corinthians. He says, this service, now he's talking to the Corinthians who have given a gift. It says service, but in the context, if you read that whole passage, he's talking about this service, this gift that you gave. It's an amazing gift, and you gave it. And here's what it accomplished. This service that you performed is not only to supply the needs of the Lord's people, but is overflowing in many expressions of thanks to God. When you give, it's not just what it accomplishes in the material world. It is about what it accomplishes in the eternal realm. And that we'll never understand the gravity of that. We'll never see the extent of that. We may never know the lives of the little girls that we have changed in Thailand and Ghana. And when we are going to, over the next 12 months, we're going to be looking at some other strategic partnerships to help people in the regional area here on the East Coast and across the nation. We don't know the impact that those changed lives will have for eternity. But that, when you begin to look beyond just supplying the needs of the Lord's people to overflowing in expressions of thanks to God, you have eyes that see beyond the temporal to the eternal. See, here's something I've learned. I love this quote. I don't know where it came from, but I'm using it. Greatness is not measured in what you have, but what you give. That's basically what Paul's saying. You've given all this. And look at the great work that's been accomplished. Look at all that's happened because you gave. When you give, it's always a trust issue. Giving is always about trust. And when you give, it increases your trust in God. Giving increases your trust in God. So just the other day, I was having a conversation with a family member. It was a great conversation, and they said, you know, it's interesting to me. We're going to be talking about giving this Sunday, and it's interesting to me. There was a time when, because of some situations, we didn't give as much and as consistently as we wanted to. We wanted to give, we just didn't. We were traveling and we didn't give as consistently. And I found myself getting so anxious and worried about finances. Like, I can never retire. If I retire, we're not going to have enough money. What's going to happen? Then we got our giving statement from the local church that we were a part of, and we saw how much we gave for the year, and we were so embarrassed. We were so embarrassed. It was such a little amount. We wanted to give at least 10%, and it was way below that. And we realized our anxiousness is potentially tied to our not giving. So they made up the amount that they should have given that previous year, and they started giving over 10% regularly and consistently. And within a few months, different things that happened that were amazing ways that God increased them or provided for them financially. Just amazing ways. Things that they could have never figured on their own. Anything they did, it was just being consistent and faithful. And the person said to me, he said, of course, we've been doing this now again for quite a while, and I don't worry now. I don't worry that I'm not going to have enough when we retire, because I'm reminded again that when I give, I'm placing my trust in a God who has everything. When you give to the local church, when you grow and take those steps up that generosity ladder, it's amazing what it does for you. It increases your trust in God. Would you stand with me this morning?